In other developments, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte says more than 20 countries have agreed to work on efforts to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. Iran insists the crucial waterway is only closed to what it calls its enemies.
I know the president was angry because he feels that European and other allies have been too slow. The good news here is that since Thursday, a group of 22 countries, most of them from NATO, but also Japan, Korea, Australia, New Zealand, the UAE and Bahrain, most of the other countries from NATO, coming together to implement his vision of making sure that the Strait of Hormuz is free, is opening up as soon as that is possible.
Well, to discuss this and all the latest developments in the conflict, I'm now joined by Mohamad Elmasry, Professor of Media Studies at the Doha Institute for Graduate Studies. Good to have you with us, Mohamad. First of all, on Mark Rutte's comments there, what do you make of that? Is this the beginning of NATO basically caving into Trump's pressure?
Well, I think some countries are feeling the pressure from Donald Trump, but I have grave doubts about what they're going to be able to do about the strait. It's actually relatively easy for Iran to disrupt the Strait of Hormuz. As I've said in past interviews, they have thousands and thousands of these drones that can strike the strait and really wreak havoc. And they can strike the strait from anywhere inside of Iranian territory. They can also use these speedboats, these unmanned speedboats that can be packed with explosives and operated by remote control. And they have other means. Obviously, they can launch missiles. Mm-hmm. So they can really wreak a lot of havoc. And it was interesting last night, Ehud Barak, the former Israeli prime minister, and maybe more importantly, the former chief of staff of the Israeli armed forces, he said that basically militarily there's not much that anybody can do to reopen the Strait of Hormuz by force in the short term. And increasingly, I think it's interesting that even Israeli media are becoming critical of Donald Trump. They are very sympathetic to Trump overall, but the Times of Israel yesterday published an op-ed that called Trump erratic and said that he is, quote, increasingly desperate. So I thought that was really an interesting commentary.
Indeed, especially coming from an Israeli newspaper. Now, this ultimatum that Donald Trump has issued to Iran, 48 hours or will obliterate energy power plants in Iran, it says we're nearing that ultimatum now, the end of that ultimatum. What do you think is going to happen here? What are the possible scenarios?
Yeah, I mean, this has already been a catastrophic war, and this would be another disaster, really, because we've already heard from Iran what they'll do.
But do you think he's likely to carry out that threat, or is that coercive diplomacy?
There are a number of possibilities. So one possibility is that this is just coercive diplomacy, and sometimes Trump does just sort of say things off the cuff, and then he contradicts himself later or doesn't follow through on his promises or his threats. So that is one possibility. Another possibility is that he's going to act on this. And again, this would be disastrous for the region. Another possibility is that he may attack, but in a very limited way, just something sort of symbolic to send a message to the Iranians.
Right.
But I'd like to think that his advisors are going to get into his ear, or that they've already done so, and advise him against this, because this would be catastrophic.
What about Iran, Mohamad Elmasry? Does it have the capability, the intent, or even the appetite to retaliate against Gulf Arab energy infrastructure in case it was attacked by the U.S.? Will they go ahead and do that, make that threat a reality?
Yeah, I tend to think that we should believe Iran when it says it's going to do something, because it has pretty much followed through on most of its promises or threats since the start of the war. Clearly, they believe that the only way for them to survive is to inflict maximum cost on not just Israel and the United States, but on the region. That's their calculation. And so if if the Israelis and the Americans do what they say they're going to do, the Iranians have already been engaged in this kind of tit for tat. We've seen that on a number of occasions. You strike us here, then we'll strike you there.
We've seen that. I mean, we're now on day 24 of the war. Have you seen a shift in the Gulf region, where some countries may now be reconsidering that neutral position they took at the beginning of the conflict, and perhaps joining now the war on Iran led by the US and Israel?
I don't necessarily think we should assume that all of the Gulf countries have the same position. I think the UAE should probably be considered on its own, and I wouldn't be surprised at some point to see them join. I would be surprised at this point. Of course, I reserve the right to change my mind. Things are changing pretty dynamically every day. But I would be surprised to see either Saudi Arabia or Qatar or Qatar join in. The UAE, I think, could.
Yeah, because I asked because there have been some reports suggesting that the UAE may be now considering to join.
Yeah, I mean, the UAE is already on board with Israel and the United States. They're a part of that axis. They normalized relations with Israel. They were quite sympathetic to Israel, even relatively sympathetic during the genocide in Gaza. So again, we have to look at the UAE sort of differently from some of the other Gulf countries. But I'd be surprised with respect to the Saudis and the Qataris in particular. I think they understand that there would be really long-term ramifications, negative consequences, and also it would be a really bad look, I think, for them to get on board with a war that is being waged by the Israelis and the Americans against a Muslim country, even though they are very critical, obviously, of Iran.
So what options do they have, then, these countries, to end this war today? Well,
you'd like to think that they have some leverage over Donald Trump. The UAE, Qatar, and the Saudis pledged about $2 trillion in investments in the American economy. And they could threaten to withdraw those pledges. I think their best option, their best bet, is to try to exert as much pressure on Donald Trump, because he does hold all the cards to end the war. I tend to think that getting involved militarily would backfire against these countries. But again, I can't get inside their heads.
Yeah, it's a very unpredictable situation, isn't it? Thank you so much, Mohamad Elmasry, for joining us. Thank you. Good to have your analysis, as always. Mohamad Elmasry is from the Doha Institute for Graduate Studies.